Think of this video as your personal plant care encyclopedia. I've pulled together all my best plant care guides for some of the most popular houseplants. Everything from lighting and watering to common mistakes and how to fix them. So whether you've got one plant or 50, this is your one-stop shop for keeping them alive and thriving. And yep, everything's timestamped down below so you can find exactly what you're looking for. Let's get into it.
Are you tired of your Monstera growing at a snail's pace? Do you dream of proudly owning a green stallion that sends out big beautiful leaves every couple of weeks with lots of slits and holes in the leaves? Maybe you've got one that is suffering with yellowing leaves that you just can't figure out why.
Well, I've got 18 Monstera plants of all different shapes and sizes in my collection. I've been growing for over a year now, so I've got a pretty good idea on what makes them tick and what makes them sick. And today, I'm going to share that wisdom with you, my plant friend.
We're at the back end of winter as I'm recording this, and it goes without saying that winter is a bit of a tough time for our Monsteras.
They're not much fans of the gloomy nights and long nights, especially in a temperate climate like mine. They crave vitamin D and there's just not much of it going around.
Now that summer is on the horizon though, we should be getting our Monstera set up properly to make the most of this golden time.
Get it right and we should see some fantastic growth with lots of mature leaves.
Mature leaves is a bit of a funny one because they often say that the famous slits and holes in the leaves come with age and maturity and that you shouldn't expect to see this on a young plant for years, but I say that's a load of rubbish. If your Monstera is showing no signs of sending out mature leaves for years, then something is not right.
I grew this guy all the way from seed 1 year ago, along with 9 of his brothers and sisters, and just look at the leaves. Slits aplenty, mature leaves in less than a year.
This guy is exactly the same. And this one. And this... Oh, what happened here? Well, 2 things actually. When I planted these bad boys, I didn't really intend on keeping them. I just didn't have the space for 10 more plants in my house, but something happened that I wasn't really expecting. I fell in love.
There was just something about birthing these guys all the way from seed that made me all gooey inside.
So I decided to keep them, but the problem was I just didn't have the real estate. So a couple were shoved in the shade and a few were lucky enough to call the windowsill home where they could bask in the sun all day. And here are the results.
This is the first golden rule of plant care. Plants love light. Any plant that is, but especially Monsteras. Mine absolutely love to sit in the brightest spot in my home.
I'm lucky enough to have this conservatory now, so they're all sat in great light on these bamboo shelves and I really am seeing great growth, even in winter. All except this guy. There's still no room at the inn, so he gets to enjoy a Sansi grow light over his head instead. A very good compromise, but not quite the replacement for the real thing.
Now, I will temper all this by saying that my climate is temperate, i.e. it's cloudy as hell. So keep a beady eye on yours if you do move him closer to the window and you're in a hot climate. You might need to acclimate him to the sun if he starts getting fussy.
The second thing is a little more pro level settings, but if you can do it, you'll get your just rewards, trust me. It's all to do with the roots, and I'm not just simply talking about repotting or anything. I'm talking about a symbiotic relationship between the roots and soil.
Sounds complicated, but it really is dead simple, so let me break it down.
Any Monstera is only as good as the roots living down below. They're the foundations that hold everything upright.
Give your Monstera the best foundations, then slitty holy leaves, here we come. But how do we do this?
Well, there's the obvious things about soil and pots that most of us know about, but there is a secret sauce that turbocharges root growth that only the pros know about. This stuff. Simply sprinkle this onto the roots just once and watch magic things happen.
This is mycorrhizal fungi, and it's like a plant underground's best friend. It simply works to extend the Monstera's root network in the soil, allowing him to drink more juice and eat more vegetables.
So root health is massively boosted and so is leaf health. As an experiment last year, I gave half of my seed-grown Monsteras a fungi sprinkle and half of them I just gave a hope and a prayer. Well, the results speak for themselves. I really have seen super quick maturity in the ones I gave the secret sauce to.
Don't let this stuff intimidate you like it did me.
It's dead simple to apply and you can easily get this stuff online. The one I use is listed in my Amazon store, linked in the description. Now, you'll have noticed this weird mouldy plastic pole thing living in the pot and pressed up against the bum of this Monstera and probably wondering what it is and why it's there. So this thing might look a bit ugly at this stage, but over time it will make the difference between having a Monstera in your house that is par for the course and one that you are truly proud to show off to all your friends and family.
You see, your Monstera is a natural climber. He loves nothing more than to hoist himself up by his hands and feet and point his face in the direction of the sun.
By hands and feet, I mean arrowroots, by the way. The weird brown alien-like things that grow out of the stem. Get these things growing into a moss pole like this and your little fella will be in plant heaven.
It turns the arrowroots from a functional accessory to one that really benefits the plant.
Once these arrowroots get their hands onto some water and nutrients, as well as a bed for the night, they turn into proper roots that give the plant energy.
This is when growth really does take off. Plus, by encouraging your guy to grow like his friends in the jungle, you're showing just how magnificent he can be.
So that's what this is, a plastic cage filled with moss for the plant to grow up and latch his roots into. It's mimicking the tree he would grow up in the jungle.
Do this as early as possible and things really do start to speed up.
Now, these moss poles aren't for everyone, of course. I mean, at this stage they do seem to dominate and take all the glory, plus they can be a bit of a pain to maintain.
That's because you want the moss to stay nice and moist so the roots start growing inside and then stay healthy.
Let the moss dry out and you have a real hard time getting it moist again, so this means keeping it topped up every few days.
It is a lot of work, but I do think it's worth it in the long run.
The alternative is to choose something more aesthetically pleasing like these trellis trellises. The arrowroots won't transform like they would in moss, but they will still use it to climb, and that's a win.
I think these trellises are great, and their details are linked in the description, along with a 10% discount code.
Now, it might seem scary, but doing this can be a real game changer at the beginning of spring. You might think I'm mad, but chopping a little guy's head off can be one of the best things you do. Normally I wouldn't really recommend this for a Monstera because he'll have to grow a new head and the first few leaves on that new head will be less mature than the leaf you cut off.
But do this in early spring and your little guy has tons of time to sort himself out. And the best part is you get to have a brand new plant for free.
Pop the cut off peas in a glass of water and roots will soon appear under the node. And it's already starting to happen with this guy.
Monstera albos are still fairly expensive, so cloning this guy for free is a real boon.
Now, to tell you the truth, the real reason I did this was because I wasn't best pleased with how Mr. Albo Sr. was growing. All the leaves were facing away from the room, which is really annoying when you're trying to create a plant paradise. So I showed him who's boss and cut his head off.
I really do recommend this if something is not growing to your liking. You get to start afresh and a new stem will grow on Senior Albo that will hopefully be more disciplined.
And then we have crooked leaves, or leaves that are just making the place look untidy. I'm in the habit of just chopping these off. Plants are there to look nice, right?
So what are some other pro-level moves that will turn your Monstera into a sexy beast? Well, I've got one and it's all to do with water.
There's two parts to this, and the first part only works if you get the second part right, so stay tuned. The conventional wisdom is that pretty much all plants, not just Monstera, grow best when their foundations are housed in soil.
It's how they grow in the jungle, right? Lovely nutrient-rich soil to spread their legs into and grow happy and strong.
Well, just look at the roots on this bad boy. It's a right ramen party, and this guy is not living in soil. He's living in just perlite.
This is a semi-hydro setup and simply involves putting your little guy into an inert rock-like substance sat in a reservoir of water instead of soil.
Leca, or little balls of hardened clay, is a popular choice, as is pon, which is basically a mix of pumice and lava rock. I tried perlite for this Monstera, which is just another fancy type of lightweight volcanic rock, and the roots have exploded. Not literally, of course.
I've been experimenting with semi-hydro for about a year now, and for some reason plants do seem to love it.
The roots grow super quick, too quick if you ask me. I'm not sure why. If you do, then do let us know down below.
The aim of the game is to have your plant sat in a plastic pot like you normally would, with leca, pon or perlite, and then have that pot sat in a puddle of water that is laced with hydroponic fertiliser.
The puddle of water makes sure the substrate doesn't dry out, you see. And no, there's no need to worry about root rot. There's plenty of oxygen knocking around, so everything should be fine.
So what's the second part that we need to get right that I mentioned earlier? Well, this basically applies just as much to Monsteras living in soil as it does to those living in semi-hydro.
If the water we give is off balance, then no amount of fertiliser we add will reach the plant, and we end up in plant misery.
It'll be like trying to eat soup without a spoon. Nothing will get to the belly.
So why would our water be off balance?
Well, it largely depends on what part of the world you live in. If you're North American, then chances are your water is slightly alkaline, and this is bad for Monsteras.
Most tropical plants prefer slightly acidic soil, and when the soil is too alkaline, they can't access the nutrients. Crazy, isn't it? It blew my mind too.
The easy thing to do here is to test your water, and there's no need to send anything off to a lab or anything daft like that.
Just simply get these test strips that I use to test the water in a swimming pool and the mystery will be solved. Too alkaline, then it will be a good idea to get a pH balancer and apply that to the water before watering your plants.
Watering Monsteras is something that lots of beginner plant folks tend to get wrong, but follow a couple of basic principles and it becomes so much easier.
The golden rule of houseplant watering is to check the soil first. Don't let the blind lead the blind, or something to that effect.
I mean, if we don't check the soil, how on earth will we know if Mr. Monstera's private parts are a sopping wet mess?
We don't. We're just guessing, and this is where the problems come in.
There are tons of apps out there giving planty folks a schedule to water their plants, and this isn't the way to go. All sorts of things can change how quickly a plant dries out, from the heating to the light and to the soil mix.
So watering is dead simple when you do two simple things. First is to check the soil. You can stick your finger in as far as it will go and feel for moisture, or you can use a moisture meter. I use the moisture meter because it takes the doubt away completely.
If it's dry, then step 2 is to water thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly.
We really do need to get that root ball fully drenched. Give as much as you like, you won't hurt him. You'll only hurt him if you do so again before he's ready, over and over and over again. But when you do come to water him, he needs all his soil to be fully wet. I used to think that snake plants were impossible to kill until I killed one, or, several.
Turns out low maintenance doesn't mean no maintenance.
So if you've ever wondered why your snake plant looks sad, mushy, or just refuses to grow, I've got you covered, because I've now got a bunch of all different shapes and sizes thriving. So here's what I wish I knew sooner.
I used to think snake plants could live anywhere, and technically they can, just like I can technically survive on instant noodles and an alarming amount of coffee, but is that thriving? Not really, no.
Years ago, I had a snake plant sitting in the corner of my room, a spot I thought had decent light. At first he seemed fine. Snake plants don't throw tantrums like other houseplants, do they?
No sudden yellow leaves, no dramatic wilting, just quiet suffering.
But then I noticed something weird. The new leaves weren't coming out thick and strong like the older ones. Instead, they were long, wobbly and flopping over like they'd completely given up on life. Even the colour looked sad. I finally moved him to a brighter window, which included a few hours of direct sun, and within weeks, new growth came in totally different. The leaves were thicker, sturdier, and the colour started to come back. The difference was ridiculous.
This is the thing, we've all been told that snake plants are low light plants, but this isn't really true. I mean, sure, they survive in low light, or rather they just take a long time to die, but they don't thrive.
If you've ever wondered why your snake plant has gone from thick and sturdy from when you bought him to weirdly tall, thin and floppy, then you've probably accidentally put him on a snake plant equivalent of a crash diet. The poor thing is starving for more light, so he's on his tippy toes, stretching himself like some kind of desperate houseplant contortionist, trying to reach for whatever tiny scraps of brightness he can get.
This is called etiolation. It's a sign that your little fellow is struggling.
But the stretching isn't the only clue, my plant friend. When I moved into this new gaff a few months ago, I popped this guy here. A pretty dark corner of my living room to say the least. I had a grow light nearby, but none of it was shining over him.
I thought it'd be fine because, it's in his genes and all that, but recently I've started to notice this.
The new leaves are losing the yellow variegation around the edges. This is my plant deciding that fancy colours are a luxury he can't afford right now.
In brighter conditions, these patterns help the plant regulate how much light he absorbs.
But in dim lighting, the little fella is essentially thinking, forget the fancy outfit, I need to photosynthesize as much as possible. So he ditches the variegation in an effort to soak up every last bit of light he can find.
So how much light do these fussy divas actually want?
As much light as you can give them. Snake plants love full sun, a fact that might surprise you. If you really want yours to thrive, stick him right in front of a sunny window.
I know houseplant guides always say bright indirect light as if full sun is some kind of death sentence, but trust me, snake plants absolutely love it.
In their natural habitat, they get blasted with sunshine all day long.
If you've only ever seen snake plants growing indoors, then you might not realise just how big and stunning they get when they have the light they actually want.
Now, there's one thing that kills more snake plants than anything else: watering. I used to pull my hair out trying to figure out how to actually water these damn things, but thankfully after years of experience I think I've cracked it.
The problem is, this plant manages to die from too much water just as much as not enough water. They're the Goldilocks of houseplants, and getting the balance right is the key to keeping them alive.
You might have heard that they never need water and so only water a couple of times a year, and this is unfortunately doing your little guy dirty. So let's make sure we don't overwater them first. Snake plants are succulents, which means they store water in their thick, fleshy leaves. It's like having a built-in emergency supply for dry spells.
But if you keep watering when the plant already has plenty of reserves, those storage cells get overloaded and the leaves start turning into a mushy mess.
Have you ever picked up a leaf and had it squashed between your fingers? That is rot.
The cells inside have basically exploded from taking in more water than they can handle, and once rot sets in, it spreads fast.
I learned this the hard way when I got my first snake plant and noob settings were dialed to 11. I didn't really give much thought to it, so I went about watering once a week without checking the soil. This was a disaster.
Within a month, I went to check in on him and found the base of the leaves looking suspiciously soft. And a few days later, those same leaves were melting off of the soil line.
Snake plants hate sitting in wet soil and they really don't like being watered on a schedule. They want their soil to dry out completely between waterings, but not stay dry forever.
Sure, snake plants can survive drought, but if the soil turns into a rock-hard desert and stays that way for weeks, the leaves start to show it.
Have you ever seen a snake plant's leaves grow sideways? This is a telltale sign of dehydration. You might think, oh no, is he thirsty? I'll give him a quick sip. But that's exactly where people go wrong. If you just pour a tiny trickle of water onto bone-dry soil, most of it won't even reach the roots. It'll just run down the sides of the pot and right out of the bottom. Meanwhile, your snake plant is sitting there thinking, that's it, that's all I get.
Instead of actually rehydrating, the leaves continue to sag, and you're left wondering why it's still looking sad even though you just watered him.
Let me take you briefly to West Africa, in your head that is. Snake plants grow in dry, rocky soils where rain is rare but heavy when it does come.
That means their roots are used to going long periods without rain, but then getting a proper soaking all at once. They aren't sipping on moisture every few days, they're chugging when it finally rains, then drying out again.
That's exactly how we should be watering them indoors, infrequently but deeply. And this is where drainage is everything. I always use a fast draining soil mix and make sure the pot has drainage holes.
So in my newbie days, I used to spy on my neighbour's big old snake plant at the window and think to myself, gosh, those plants sure do get big. I best stick mine into a big pot so that you can size up quick.
Unfortunately for me though, this didn't really work out so well. Not only would they not grow, but this is actually one of the quickest and easiest ways to mess them up.
I've now realised that when you stick a snake plant in a pot that's way bigger than he needs, there's more soil than there are roots.
And what does all that extra soil do? Well, it holds on to water. And what happens when snake plant roots sit in wet soil for too long? Yeah, rot. See, snake plants don't have massive root systems. They're actually pretty compact compared to how big the leaves get.
If you throw one into a pot that's way too big, then the roots are just sitting there struggling to keep up while all the excess soil stays damp for ages.
You might not even think you're overwatering, but the plant is basically stuck in a swamp with no escape. I learned this the hard way when I repotted a snake plant into a much bigger pot, thinking I was doing him a favour. Weeks went by, and instead of growing, it just sat there looking deeply unimpressed. Then I poked at the soil and realised his private parts were still wet, even though I hadn't watered in ages.
I had to pull him out, chop off all the rotted roots and downsize the pot, basically undoing all my hard work.
So what size pot should you actually use? The general rule is only go up one size at a time, but in truth you're fine to go a couple of sizes bigger. Just don't go from this to something like this. If the roots are tightly packed and circling the bottom, just move up a little.
Snake plants don't actually mind being slightly root bound. They tend to push out new growth faster when they feel slightly snug, so don't rush to repot.
Now, after all that talk about snake plants hating too much water, you might be thinking, hang on a sec, if they hate sitting in soggy soil, why have you got 2 videos about them growing in water on your channel? Ah yes, this is something that really did used to confuse the bejesus out of me, but after a bit of experimentation it all made sense to me. Overwatering and a plant living in water are not the same thing.
The problem with overwatering is that the plant is forced to live in soggy soil for weeks or months on end. It's not really the water in the soggy soil that's doing the damage, but rather the lack of oxygen.
Roots need to breathe just as much as you and me, and wet soil just sucks out the air like a vacuum. When a plant is living in just water, there is plenty of oxygen around the roots. I actually put this to the test again recently and moved 2 of my snake plants into leca, which are just little balls of hardened clay, and sat in a reservoir of water in a pot. Well, so far neither of them have died, which I'm counting as a win. In fact, they both seem to be thriving. Look who's coming out to say hello at the bottom of the pot.
So why would you even bother with semi-hydro? Well, I'm not really a semi-hydro preacher or anything. I've just been experimenting recently and there are a few things I like about it.
For one, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of watering. No more poking the soil and wondering if it's too dry or not dry enough. With leca, the plant just drinks when it needs to. Plus, it helps prevent overwatering since the roots are never sat in soggy soil. There's always airflow around them. If you're a chronic underwaterer, a self-watering setup with leca means your plant won't be left high and dry just because you forgot about him for a bit.
And the best bit? No gnats.
Have you ever bought a snake plant and thought, why does this look so lonely? Well, you're not alone. A single snake plant can look a bit sparse, can't it? Especially when he's young.
But here's a trick. Instead of waiting for him to fill out, you can cheat the system by combining multiple plants into one pot for an instantly fuller look.
I did this last year with 3 smaller snake plants, and now the pot is bursting with growth. It's practically trying to climb out, which is exactly the kind of problem I love to have. Now, if you're going to do this, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, pot size still matters. You don't want to go too big just because you're combining plants. Remember, extra soil equals extra moisture, which equals root rot waiting to happen.
The goal is to give them just enough space to grow without drowning them.
Second, watering is even more important in a packed pot. With more roots competing for water, they'll dry the soil out faster, which means you'll need to check in on them a little more often. But still no tiny trickles, eh? And finally, light is key if you want that full, lush look to last. If your snake plants are packed in together but only getting a little bit of light, they'll start stretching out, getting floppy and losing that nice upright shape. I've got a bunch of jade plants of all different shapes and sizes in my home that I've been growing for a good few years now. There's Big Mama Jade with her girthy trunks and bushy hair, this slightly younger but equally girthy one that I call Jaden, 2 younglings that only came into existence this year, these 5 babies that have only just come out of the womb, and then there is Jada, who spends her days living in water, but more on why that is later.
Over the years, I've learned a trick or two on how to keep these lasses happy, which is no mean feat, and I'm going to share it with you in this very video so that you can grow a thriving jade plant with confidence. So let's get straight to it.
The thing you'll notice about Big Mama is how bushy she is looking. The main reason for this is the short gaps between the nodes on the stem.
The nodes are just where the leaf emerges from the stems, and the shorter the distance, the lusher your little gal will look.
Let's compare Big Mama to Jada, the one that is living in water. Jada looks a little stretched out, doesn't she? There's a good inch or so between the nodes and this isn't ideal. If this continues, she'll be all lanky and stretched out by the time she's a young Jadette.
So why is this happening to Jada and potentially to your jade too? Well, there's only one answer. Light.
Big Mama has spent her days basking in beautiful morning sunshine pretty much all her life, and so hasn't needed to get on tippy toes in search of some vitamin D. Jada hasn't been so lucky. She gets to call this spot home and it's less than ideal. This spot does face south, which is ideal, but with all this going on above her, she just struggles to get a tan. So what does she do? She stretches her arms so that her top leaves can reach the good stuff, sacrificing a compact look in the process. Big Mama gets a good view of the sun for pretty much most of the day as it circles around my conservatory, so she doesn't have to bother herself with all this stretching malarkey, which is a relief for her because she's just getting too old for this game. Now, most people get this wrong about jade plants. They love sun. The more sun you can give them, the better. I know you've probably read or heard that indoor plants should be protected from direct sun at all costs, but this isn't really the case with jade plants. They're a type of succulent and so crave those ultraviolet rays. In fact, if the leaves are looking a bit like this rather than this, then your little lass just isn't getting enough light. This is sun stress, but in a good way. It's like the plant applying her own factor 10 just so her skin doesn't blister so much that we have to take her to hospital. Jaden achieved this look in my old house where she used to spend her days lounging on my sunny windowsill basking in afternoon sun. Things are a little crowded in my new place, so she doesn't have quite a sunnier spot, as you can see with the newest leaves. Not the same amount of purple edging. I do want to get this back though, plus I want my jades to do something that they've never done for me. Bloom. Yep, they will flower if conditions are sunny enough, and I've personally never managed to achieve such a feat, but I do have a cunning plan. This summer, I'm going to pop Big Mama and Jaden just outside of my patio steps. This is a nice southwest facing spot and they'll be living the dream. Popping plants outside during summer is a bit of a hack for epic growth, and I recommend you consider this for yours. Not only will they get great light, they will also get free nitrogen from the rain, which is plentiful around these parts, let me tell you. Now, there is something you can do to correct this legginess that I'll spill the beans on in a bit, but first we need to talk about water. Check out the legs on Big Mama. Big, thick and strong, aren't they? The older and happier a jade gets, the bigger her trunk will become. But this girthy trunk doesn't just look epic, it's also a secret weapon that will help in times of strife. As I mentioned earlier, jades are succulents and are naturally found in the dry, rocky soils of South Africa and Mozambique. These chunky stems then are designed to hold on to reserves of water during dry spells, with the empty stores getting filled up when a big rain comes along. It's exactly the same for their thick fleshy stems. A well-watered jade will have plump leaves and a firm trunk. Knowing this can tell us a lot about how we should be watering them at home. Let a jade sit in soggy soil for weeks at a time and the roots are going to draw up too much moisture to the stems and leaves with nowhere for it to go, leaving the plant to rot from the inside. Doesn't sound pleasant, does it? Mushy leaves or stems means your jade is being overwatered and you really need to hold back. All of this is mentioned in my plant troubleshooting handbook that is linked in the description to this video, and the best part is, it's completely free to download. I crunched the numbers the other day and it's been downloaded by 25,000 planty folks from all over the world, so don't miss out on getting your copy. So how do we know when to water? I'll tell you my approach, but first it's important to not fret too much about it. They are quite forgiving plants and you really do need to mess up big time in order to kill one. Let's start from when I just watered Big Mama. Because she has quite a big pot, I know that the soil won't dry out again for at least a week and a half. This might be different for you depending on how hot and humid your home is, which is why it's always best to check the soil before you do anything. So in about 10 days, I'll come along with my moisture meter and test the soil. If it's in any way moist, I'll do nothing and come back in 2 or 3 days. I want the soil to be dry. When it is, then I'll have a little fondle of the leaves. Are they feeling plump still? If they are, then I know they've still got plenty of reserves, so I'll wait another 2 or 3 days and check again. A jade that isn't quite ready for a drink will have leaves that are difficult to bend without snapping them in half. One that is ready for water though will have leaves that are more pliable, and the stems will also feel a little less firm. Don't worry too much about giving water a little too early or a little too late. They are quite forgiving plants, like I said, and the real danger is having her sit in a swampy mess. Now that she's finally ready for a drink, I don't do this. I know she's a succulent and we're all worried about giving too much, but giving a little trickle is a big mistake. Remember, those reserves in the stems and leaves are low, so we need to top them up fully, which is why we water deeply, just like the rains of Africa water deeply when they finally arrive. To be safe, I'd water over a sink or something so that excess water can trickle away and not sit in the pot. Standing water is like kryptonite to a jade. So why then is Jada able to spend all her days living in just water?
Well, this perfectly illustrates a misconception lots of folks have about overwatering, including yours truly when I was just starting out collecting plants.
It's not the water that is the menace when it comes to overwatering, which I know sounds strange, but instead, a lack of oxygen is.
I do bang on about this often in my videos, but plant roots need to breathe just as much as you and me.
The thing that is sorely missing in soggy soil is oxygen. Water and soil just don't mix to create a happy environment for roots. Just water on the other hand though is fine. This is a semi-hydro setup by the way, which is basically the plant living in fancy stones sat in a pool of water, and I set this up a few months ago to prove that it's not water that does the damage. If it was, then Jade would have perished long ago.
So what do we do if we don't want to bother with semi-hydro and we're still worried about overwatering?
Well, there are two things that are really going to help you keep your jade happy. The first is soil.
Keeping them in the right soil mix really will go a long way. In fact, I wouldn't bother with soil at all.
Going soilless doesn't have to be about going semi-hydro.
The main ingredient I use from the mixes from Cybertanica is coconut coir, which acts in a similar way to soil in the way it retains moisture, but because it's light as a feather, it won't hold on to moisture like a sponge like soil or compost does.
When repotting a jade, the aim of the game is to pop her in a soil that is very free draining. The enemy is soggy soil, so we want excess water to be able to drain away as much as possible. Adding things like perlite or even sand will help a bunch too. If you're the DIY kind, then a good ratio would be something like 5 parts coconut coir to 2 parts perlite.
The second part of getting all this right is the pot she gets to call home.
99.9% of my plants live in plastic pots with drainage holes in the bottom. Honestly, it just makes for a simple life. Any jade you buy in the store should come in one of these, but if they don't, take her out straight away and put her in one.
So, we've covered off light and water, which are the two biggies when it comes to jade plant care, but the next most important thing to get right is pruning.
Let's have a look at Big Mama again. The thing you'll notice about her is that she's got lots of stems growing in all sorts of different directions. This didn't just happen by divine intervention, this was your boy snipping her any chance I got. The absolute best thing about these gals is how predictable they are. Snip a stem, and in most cases 2 new branches will grow just below where we made the cut. And this is the secret to a bushy specimen like Big Mama. And we can use this to our advantage when things start to get a bit leggy like with Jada. There. All I need to do now is pop her somewhere much brighter so the same thing doesn't happen again. So what's going to happen now is that a new branch is going to form in that nook between the leaf and the stem. So we'll have 2 on this stem and 2 on this stem. Each of the stems will grow out in the same direction as the leaves.
I mention this because you can use that knowledge to train your jade to grow in exactly the way you want with a few strategic cuts.
Pruning is seriously one of the best things you can do, and I'm always at it. I like to wait until there are about 5 or so sets of leaves on the stem and then make a snip. I do this over and over again, it keeps things nice and compact. So what do you do with all the leftover pieces?
Well, we don't chuck them in the bin because we can make brand new plants out of these in the shape of something like this or even something like this.
These are 2 stem cuttings that I popped into their own pots a couple of months ago, and before long I'll have 2 more Big Mamas on my hands. This, on the other hand, is a collection of individual leaf cuttings that have successfully rooted, and we can now start to see the first shoots appearing. Is your pothos growing slowly? Maybe the leaves keep coming out small and not massive like the ones you always see on Insta. Or maybe you've got issues like this, or even this, and you can't figure out why. Well, I've been growing them for years now, and I finally feel like I know what I'm doing with them. So much so that I can now proudly show off bad boys like this, and this. So let me share what I've learned with you so that you can transform your pothos from small ugly duckling to big beautiful swan. Let's start with this monstrosity. Well, that's a bit harsh actually, because I kinda like him, but I know he's not got the most conventional look. Unfortunately, this leggy growth with teeny tiny leaves is dead common for pothos, and there's only one real reason this happens. It all started when the little fella was living here. This spot is about 3 meters from the nearest window, and any plant would suffer so far from a decent light source. But there's a grow light above him, I hear you wail, and yes, that is correct. This is exactly why the bits and pieces near the pot are nice and full, but the further we go from the pot, the stragglier he becomes.
Up top, he was getting the light he craves, but everywhere else didn't have so much luck.
And when a plant suffers from a lack of light, it goes out hunting for vitamin D, and this is when we get the stretched out look. So if the gaps between the leaves resemble something like this, then your little guy's crying out for more light. The gaps in the nose should be like this in an ideal world, one leaf after the other. This guy lives right up against my southwest facing window and is absolutely loving life. He's even basking in some naughty direct sun, and there isn't a blemish in sight.
This is the great thing about Pothos, they can handle a surprising amount of sun, so it's worth experimenting with yours.
But do it slowly though, especially if yours has been living in the downstairs loo. The sudden change might upset him. So back to our satin Pothos, he's now been moved here. Still not great because this legginess has definitely got worse, but like I said, I think this look he's sporting is actually quite amusing. If I was particularly bothered, then the only real way to cure him is to cut him.
Yep. Snip off those stems, improve the light, and he should grow some nice compact stems like he's supposed to. And we'll come back to pruning in a jiffy, by the way. But first, let's talk about pots.
It might be surprising to learn, but pots are so important in the plant game, especially for Pothos. I pretty much keep all of my plants in plastic nursery pots, and there are two reasons for this. The first is drainage. These stop the plants sitting in a puddle, which is terrible for root health. The water flows out the bottom beautifully.
And second, they stop the soil from drying out too quickly.
You've probably noticed that your Pothos is a bit of a rampant grower if you've got the light right, and any plant that is a rampant grower is normally a thirsty so-and-so. Pothos is exactly that. Take this guy for example. He's big and bushy, growing stems at a jolly good rate, and I'm having to water him twice a week. That's double the normal rate of my other plants. It's why then that I recommend avoiding these.
I know they look rustic and all that, and I used to love them too, but if you pop your little guy in one of these, you're just asking for trouble, unfortunately.
Terracotta is super porous, so anything inside just dries out so much faster than in a plastic pot. The moisture just leaches out into the air, never to be seen again.
I found this out the hard way. When I was a noob back in the day, I popped to my local nursery and I bought 10 of them, only to find that they're not really great for tropical plants.
I was spending far too much time watering my collection. It was becoming a part-time job.
Now, if you are absolutely hell-bent on using terracotta because you love the look, then there is something you can do to help.
Glaze the sucker inside out. Honestly, this will go a long way. They'll still dry out a bit, but nowhere near as quick. And make sure you glaze the saucer too, or that will make a mess of the wood your plant sits on. So I introduced you to this fella earlier and raved about how he got his beautiful complexion by living up against a southwest facing window. And the truth is, this is only half the story because these leaves wouldn't get so big so quickly just through light. Yeah, it's the moss pole behind his bum that is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Now, there is the good, the bad, and the downright ugly when dealing with these things.
The good is fairly obvious, stallion-esque leaves. This happens because the moss-filled plastic cage is acting like a secondary pot, with aerial roots growing into the moss and providing extra water and nutrients for the plant.
Now the bad is that, well, they're a massive pain in the bum to maintain. Seriously, it's like I've got a third child.
These things dry out super quick and so constantly need topping up with water pretty much every day.
And then there's the rigmarole of extending the moss bowls and then eventually chopping and then extending and not knowing whether he's going to live through all that. It's all very stressful.
And the ugly is, well, just that. They're ugly. Plus, they're a haven for fungus gnats. So I don't really recommend them unless you're up for the challenge. They create monsters, but you have to deal with the slime. Now that's an analogy. So, is your Pothos doing this? Annoying, isn't it? There are a couple of reasons this might happen. The primary reason is getting the watering wrong, especially if the leaf is all green. I'll explain why this is less likely on white leaves in a sec. Overwatering was the main reason I used to struggle with these plants and why I ended up losing a couple along the way.
But what even is overwatering? We hear it all the time, don't we? And I used to think it was simply just giving the plant too much water. But it turns out there's more to it than that.
The real killer is when things go anaerobic. This is just a fancy term for lacking oxygen. Roots need to breathe just as much as you and me, and when they can't, they give up the ghost and leaves and stems soon follow.
So how does this happen? Well, for the best root killing recipe, you need just 3 things.
Soil that is super heavy and clay-like, a pot with no drainage, and a heavy hand. The clay-like soil will have very little air pockets as it is, and when you add water to the mix, it's a recipe for disaster. The pot with no drainage means the soil stays wet forever, making the soil problem worse, and then the heavy hand is the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake. The answer is to use a light soil mix containing coconut coir with perlite so they can drain freely, use a pot with holes, and don't water like an ape, like I do. So how does all this give us brown leaves? Basically, the stems draw up more water than they need, the leaves get full to the brim, the cells eventually burst, and the damage is seen through brown edges or spots. Grim, eh? So what about white leaves, or leaves with white variegation?
This might not actually be overwatering, my plant friend. It could be, of course, but it might just be nature taking its course.
I find this all the time with my Pothos marble queen. She has big sections of white variegation, and those sections often die off. It used to drive me nuts because I couldn't figure it out. But then I read up about chlorophyll and it all made sense to me.
Not to get too technical, but chlorophyll is the green pigment in the leaves that allows the plant to photosynthesize. And the greener the leaf, the easier you can do this.
So when parts of the leaf are all white, i.e. lacking in chlorophyll, then the struggle is real. So real that it eventually gives up the ghost. You see, it's not you after all, it's the plant.
So what's happening when, instead of the variegation going brown, it just disappears? Leaf by leaf, things just go more and more green.
This is a classic, and again, it's all to do with light. Your little guy is craving more light, or more energy from the light, so to maximise that, he starts spitting out all green leaves. More chlorophyll, more photosynthesis. Cheeky bugger, eh? To stop him in his tracks, the solution is obvious. Stick him near a window or stick a Sansi grow light in his face. He'll soon learn. I promised I'd come back to pruning, and so here we are.
If you are new to this plant game, then you might be a bit apprehensive about taking your scissors to your little guy, but truthfully this is the best thing you can do for him.
I've pruned this enjoy here, there and everywhere. So much so that his head is spinning and he still lives to tell the tale. It's pretty much impossible to kill a plant by snipping a stem. A healthy stem, that is. If it is a rotten stem, then there's probably something more untoward going on elsewhere.
But why bother with all this pruning malarkey in the first place? Why not just let bygones be bygones?
Well, first, it keeps the plant in a nice compact shape, basically avoids things like this. Instead, you end up with a bushy look like this, much better. And second, it allows you to play God and create life. Yep, stick the cut off pieces into some water and let the root making magic happen. All you need is a stem piece with a node and a leaf attached. A node is just a bit on the stem where the leaf comes out. It's marked with a line around the stem normally. It will take a few weeks for roots to grow, and then you just pop them into some soil like I showed on a recent Patreon video, and you've got a brand new free plant. Absolute winner. Calatheas are beautiful plants, but they sure can be tricky. If you've ever had one, then you'll know all about crispy brown leaves.
This used to happen to me every time I got one, and it drove me nuts. So much so that I vowed to never buy one again. That was until I discovered some secret care tips that have transformed my Calatheas from ugly ducklings to beautiful swans that I'm going to share in this video so that your Calatheas can finally thrive and you can proudly show them off in your home.
If you're a subscriber to the channel, then you'll know all about my struggles with the infamous Calathea zebrina.
If you're new here, then this plant is by far one of the trickiest plants to get looking her best. She's so stressful to me, in fact, that I put about 60% of my hair loss solely down to her, but thankfully the dog days are over.
To be fair to her, it was pretty much all my fault. I just didn't understand her, and I didn't put the time and effort in to understand her either.
Let's talk about watering first, because if you get this wrong, pretty much any Calathea is going to be miserable, no matter what else you do.
Now, my general advice for watering houseplants is this. Trundle over to your plant on a Saturday, poke your finger deep into the soil, or better yet, get your moisture meter out, and only water her when the bottom half of the soil is starting to feel dry.
We do this to avoid the evils of overwatering, the #1 killer of houseplants the world over. Probably.
I used to do this for all of my plants no matter what they were, but doing this for a Calathea will leave you in a tailspin of crispy brown leaves before you've had a chance to say crispy brown leaves.
You see, these big beautiful leaves are sensitive souls and they really hate drying out. much more so than pretty much any other plant.
So it's our job as plant parents to dote on our dear Calathea and water at the perfect time. Sounds easy, right?
Honestly, the window of watering perfection is bigger than you might think.
When you stick your index finger into the soil, it should feel damp in the middle. This is a good time to give her a drink.
Not wet. Wet is bad. Wait a few days and check again.
But what about overwatering, I hear you wail? Moist soil is a killer, surely.
Not really, my plant friend. The real killer is a lack of oxygen, and that only really happens when the soil is sopping wet, like fully saturated for weeks on end. It drowns your poor little lass.
So don't worry about watering when the soil is damp. There's still plenty of oxygen knocking around and your little girl will be as happy as Lassie.
And here's a pro tip that's worked wonders for me when I learned it all those many moons ago.
Never water your Calathea like this, or any other plant for that matter. A little dribble just won't cut it. Drown her like this instead.
Dry patches from not giving enough are really going to mess with her complexion. Overwatering is much more about frequency than volume. This is the Sheffield May plant's mantra. Now before we move on from watering, there is something you must absolutely know first that has not only transformed the fortunes of my Calatheas, but also the fortunes of thousands of Calatheas the world over owned by the viewers of my channel.
You see, I first brought this to my channel last year and the feedback since has been overwhelming, with tons of folks saying it's transformed their plants, which has been so fantastic to hear.
It's all about the water we feed our dear darlings, and if we don't correct it, no amount of care, love and attention will help.
The crux of it is this: the water you are feeding your Calathea is most likely slowly poisoning her.
Shocking, I know, but hear me out.
Without getting into the whys and the whatnots and the oh the earth is flat conspiracy like stuff, the truth is our tap water is treated with chlorine and a couple of other bits and pieces to make it safe to drink.
This is perfectly fine for us, probably, but over time, this is a serial killer for our sensitive plants like Calathea. It's one of the main reasons we see crispy brown edges on the leaves.
The chlorine builds up in the soil and affects the root's ability to draw on water and nutrients, and we end up with damaged leaf tissue. Leave the water out for 24 hours to off gas, I hear you scream, but in reality, this doesn't work so great.
There's a whole bunch of reasons that I went into in this video here, but the primary one is that most of the time water companies are now using chloramine, which doesn't off gas like chlorine.
So as far as I'm concerned, there are only two solutions for this, one of which is 10 times easier than the other. Rainwater is Mother Nature's finest and has no man-made nasties, so if you have the right setup, then use that.
If you can't be bothered to mess around with all that, then just simply treat your tap water with water conditioner. 2 drops of this stuff will immediately neutralise chlorine and you're good to go. It's used in the aquarium world to keep fish safe from chlorine and other heavy metals, and it works just as well on plants.
And trust me, I've seen a huge difference in all my green buddies and so many of my viewers.
In fact, do me a little favour and leave it in the comments if you're one of the OGs, so that we can help out anyone who's still on the fence about this stuff.
So, I recently moved into this new house of mine and I realised pretty much straight away that it's nowhere near planty enough for me. It is for Mrs S of course, but not for me. Not compared to my old gaff anyway. So I've been upping my numbers, and this weekend I bought 3 brand new Calatheas.
You see, I'm not in any way, shape or form scared to pick up these guys from the shops anymore. Now that I know water conditioner is the secret sauce, and it's a real boom because they sure do brighten up a space with their big beautiful leaves.
So where am I going to put these bad boys?
This is a decision that will make or break any new Calathea. Get it wrong and I could easily have a crispy mess on my hands.
So to help me decide where to plonk my new guys, I did a bit of digging on the internet and found out that they tend to hang out on the forest floor of the tropical jungle in their natural habitat, where they only get dappled sunlight throughout the day.
What does this mean for us then? That they need protection from the harshest sun.
This is my plan then. I tend to keep the majority of my plants in my conservatory where they get to bask in sun all day because it faces southwest, and this is where I want my new gals to go. I could put them over there or over there, but I do want them to get plenty of the good stuff so they can get off to a good start in my home, and they do like bright light, just not tons of direct sunlight. Now, if I keep my new gals on this side of the conservatory, then they will most definitely fry like a Sheffielder in the Bahamas. It's just too close to the window and there's very little protection from midday sun. This side I think is perfect. They'll be protected from the harshest afternoon sun by the roof, as they will sit quite deep into the conservatory, but they will get a few hours of soft late afternoon sun as it sets low over my garden. Midday sun is bad, but early morning or late afternoon sun will be quite beneficial. So there they sit. Look nice, don't they? I could probably do with getting a little stand for them so they aren't sat on the floor, but I'll get that soon enough. Actually, maybe not. Just as I'm sat here writing this video, it's dawned on me that this new house of mine is something that should make my plants very happy, in the winter at least. Underfloor heating, so maybe I should ditch the plant stand idea. I mentioned earlier that Calatheas hail from the tropics, so it stands to reason they don't appreciate chilly temperatures much. And in the winter, all this glazing means this conservatory wants to fight the central heating as much as possible to cool down the room, but having some gentle heat rising from the floor will be a real boon for my plants. And it's not the hot dry air from radiators swashing around either. A gentle heat from the floor that will warm up the soil nicely and trick them into thinking they're home. Perfect. So what can you do if you don't have underfloor heating but you really want to make your Calathea feel special, or they're suffering from living in a chilly room during winter? Heat mats. I've not gone there myself, but people do swear by them, especially for propagation. So, what hacks will I be implementing to boost the humidity of my new Calatheas? Misting? Setting up humidity trays? Moving them all to my bathroom? None of the above. Nada. Niente. As a rule, I do absolutely nothing to control or increase humidity in my home. And if a plant doesn't like it, it can do one basically. When I started to see crispy brown nastiness on my Zebrina, I just assumed it was a humidity problem like everyone else, but the truth is, most of the time it's not. It's a water quality problem. In my experience, it's not really high humidity that they want, but instead consistent humidity. The repeated rise and fall of air moisture will be not great for the leaves. But in reality, this is fairly easy for me to say because my house sits at around 50 to 60% humidity, so most plants should be happy enough in my home. If you live somewhere that is only 20% humid, then you may well struggle to keep Calatheas 100% happy. That's a lot of percentages. My head is spinning. I found that doing things like misting and sitting plants in a puddle of water won't really achieve much. Misting only increases humidity around the plant for a minute, and the tiny amount of vapour rising from the wet pebble tray really won't move the needle. Keep it consistent, nail the watering and see how you get on. I often say in my videos that a plant is only as good as its foundations. Happy roots equal happy plant, and this is never truer than with a Calathea. A word of warning then. Mess around with their roots too much and they'll show you their displeasure the first chance they get. You might have been wondering if I repotted my new ones as soon as I got them home. You know, to get them into my own soil, which is better than the soil that the grower put them in. And the answer is most definitely not. Plants are sensitive souls, and Calathea are particularly Goldilocks. They don't much like change, so taking them from the lovely greenhouse to your home and then messing with the private parts will leave them in a tailspin. You're much better off just leaving your new green friend to sit and chill and become used to your home. Check if she needs a nappy change in about 6 months. I only tend to repot my Calatheas when the roots have filled out the pot a fair bit, like 70% roots to 30% soil or something. And when I do repot, I only untangle the meatiest of knots. Everything else I just leave to sort out by themselves. So what soil do I use when I finally get round to doing the deed? Well, these days I use Sire Botanica's pre-made mixes and my plants love it. It's a coconut core based mix with perlite and other bits and pieces that is perfect for indoor plants, and their details are in the description. A few years ago I was in the habit of grabbing some compost from the garden and using that to repot, but my plants really didn't thank me for it. Yellow leaves, brown tips, wilting, it was a right mess, and it was all because of the soil. You're probably not growing this plant in your home, but you absolutely should be. This is hands down my favourite plant in my entire collection, and I've got over 200 to choose from. I mean, just look at her. Absolutely stunning, and completely different to the average Monstera or Pothos. She's got a bit of a fan club too, with tons of viewers to my videos always asking what that bright red plant is on the shelf. She's a Coleus. You'll probably know the Coleus as a plant for your garden. She's normally grown from seed as an annual to bring beautiful colour to your borders, but why not grow as a houseplant? This can absolutely be done, and the great thing is that you can keep her going all year long so that she brightens up your living room on those cold, gloomy days in winter, as well as adding some colour in summer.
Outside, unless you're lucky enough to live somewhere nice and warm, these lasses die off in winter, but we don't have that problem inside.
But to get her to grow big and beautiful, we need to get a few things right so that we can coax those beautiful colours out of the leaves. And trust me, this gal is a grower once she gets going. We're talking doubling in size in just a couple of months if we get the conditions right.
I've had mine for a couple of years now and have to constantly tame the beast so that she doesn't take over my house, but we'll come back to that in a bit.
So, it's the beginning of April as I'm filming this, with spring and summer just around the corner, and this is the time when things really start to take off for Coleus plants. If you've already got one, then you might have been looking at yours over winter wondering why she was looking a bit of a mess, and basically it's because they suffered the most serious case of seasonal affective disorder, more than any other plant, apart from maybe alocasia.
You can see this with Chloe here. I call mine Chloe the Coleus, by the way, because, well, why not?
The lower leaves are a bit puny and lacking colour, whereas the top growth is looking pretty beefy with deep red tones. So I mentioned how they're super quick growers, and to prove the point, just take a peek at this stem. This growth from here to here has occurred in just the last couple of weeks. She's caught a whiff of spring and responded with a growth spurt.
Honestly, they love nothing more than to grow like wild stallions, which isn't always as rosy as it sounds, and I'll come back to why in a sec.
So how have I helped Chloe put on a growth spurt like a spotty teenager? Simple. Light. Coleus plants love light, more so than any other plant in my book.
In my climate, here in not so sunny Sheffield, I give Chloe as much sun as I can, and I still don't think she's that content.
Give your gal the light she deserves and you'll be rewarded with big leaves that are chock full of colour. Keep her in the dungeon and things will be looking pretty dull. Just look at the lower leaves on Chloe compared to the top ones. Pale and a bit miserable, aren't they? That's because they were the ones suffering through winter and are now pretty much all blocked up by their higher up neighbours now the sun has finally arrived. So give your Coleus as much light as you've got.
But what about direct sun? Should they be basking on a south facing windowsill in the northern hemisphere all day long?
For my climate, yes. But for hotter, more luxurious climates than mine, I'd play it by ear.
If you're in the desert or the tropics, then do experiment with a couple of hours of sun a day to see if she's got a grin on her face.
If you see things like fading on the top of the leaves or the dreaded leaf drop, then chances are she's getting a bit grumpy.
I'm saying this because I've obviously not tested this gal in all climates, so you just have to use your judgment, I'm afraid.
At the very least, give your gal a solid view of the sky. This is the golden rule of thumb I go by when seeing if a spot in my home is decent for natural light. If the sky is blocked off by walls, trees and bushes, then it's not going to be a highlight spot. Chloe lives right here, high up on this bamboo shelf in my conservatory, so gets a glorious view of the sky, the lucky thing. The more sun I give her, the more she responds with fast growth and deep colours. So give your gal the light she craves and she'll become the stallioness of your dreams. So much so that she will actually need attending to pretty soon. Seriously, don't let your Coleus go for long without giving her the chop. There's a couple of reasons for this.
The first is to make sure she doesn't take over your house like Audrey. These stems grow very long very quickly, so we need to keep them in check.
And second, by regularly pruning, we encourage a much bushier profile. Check out where I made my last cuts on Chloe at the beginning of spring. 2 brand new shoots have shot out ready to conquer my home.
This is the secret sauce for a fast growing, super bushy Coleus and helps prevent your plant from becoming a leggy mess.
Legginess ain't the one, trust me. For plants anyway. You end up with large spaces between the leaves, which is never a clever look. So the best way to do this is by regularly pinching the stems. But at the end of winter, it's actually a good idea to do something more like this. I know, you're probably thinking I've just killed the plant, right? But honestly, I haven't. This was Chloe's sister. She was looking a bit out of control with long straggly stems, so I decided the best thing for her was a full reset.
This is always a good thing to do at the end of winter to set her up properly for spring and summer. Trust me, by summer, she'll be big and beautiful again.
Look, she's already started to grow new stems and it's only been a week. So what to do with all these stem pieces that we've lobbed off our dear darling? No, don't chuck them in the bin, you Wally. Stick them in some dirt and make brand new life. Seriously, it really is that easy. They grow roots at the drop of a hat and there's no need to mess around with water or perlite prop boxes or anything. Just good old dirt and you'll have brand new plants in a couple of weeks. They're honestly the easiest plant to propagate. But What dirt do you use? That is the question. I'll admit this is a little tricky because Coleus do like a drink.
I've learned this the hard way, but Coleus don't like to have their soil dry out fully. It makes them down tools and drop leaves. Petulant little divas, I know, but try not to let the soil go bone dry.
This does go against my normal watering advice for most houseplants, but it's the best way. It's made all the trickier by the fact that they dry out much quicker than most other houseplants because of how rapid they grow. They've got a thirst for growth and need lots of water to keep up with that growth. So I like to use my moisture meter, as you may know, and I don't let Chloe go too far into the dry zone. The perfect level is around 3. But to be honest, these days I've skipped the probe and just gone by weight. Feels light? Then I give her a drink. It's really hard to overwater her, you see.
So what does this mean for soil, I hear you wail?
Well, it's better to use soil that is free draining but doesn't dry out too much. This means it needs to have perlite in, but I'd leave out the extra chunky bits like bark so there's half a chance of holding on to some moisture for a little while, and I found Cybertanica's Universal Mix to be perfect.
I did have her in the extra chunky aroid mix, but I ended up having to water every 3 days, and honestly no plant deserves that much attention.
Now, when it does come to watering, the trick is to drown that hoe. Don't just tickle the roots with a wee dram of water, no, give her a thorough waterboarding. Drench the soil as much as you can. You need to get all the roots fully wet. This applies to any plant, which is why I always ram home this point. Don't do this and you'll start to see the dreaded leaf drop and all the self-doubt that brings. And another top tip from me is to not water your Coleus like this, but like this instead, and there's a couple of reasons for this. First, I think it makes for a much more even watering by avoiding the problem of water skidding off the surface and not penetrating the middle. You want deep penetration, my plant friend. And second, it prevents the leaves getting wet.
It's not a massive deal, but I find that the leaves can go a bit limp when they regularly get water spilled on them.
I know it speaks more to my ape-handedness, but worth considering anyway. It's also why I don't really bother misting Chloe. I just know she won't like it.
I don't mist any of my plants, truth be told, because it doesn't do much to raise humidity in my opinion, but that's a battle for another day. So I've banged on lots about how much of a fast grower Chloe and the rest of her species are, and this can only mean one thing, right?
That she has an insatiable diet. And this is somewhat true.
Now, I used to believe that plant food equals fast growth, but I've now realised that light is most responsible for this.
Fertiliser is the spark and light is the fuel. I think that analogy works. This waffle just means fertiliser is needed to support her growth and make her leaves super vibrant.
Don't get too vexed on the type of fertiliser you need either. I used to use the devil itself, Miracle-Gro, on my plants and they seemed happy enough.
I switched to Houseplant Focus because, well, I'm not sure actually. Maybe because it's organic and kinder to plant roots, or maybe because it's 3 times more expensive and must mean it's 3 times better, right? Anyway, not a major difference in my plant since the switch was made, but plenty good enough. Do you know what the worst thing you can do to your Coleus is? Apart from leaving her to fend for herself in a blizzard, that is.
Keeping her in an unglazed terracotta pot. Terracotta and Coleus go together like chalk and cheese.
It goes back to watering and how they hate dry soil and how terracotta evaporates moisture like nobody's business. Not a match made in heaven. Go for plastic, which you can then plonk into a decorative pot to make it all so pretty. And as always, make sure the pot has drainage holes. The plastic one, dummy. You need somewhere for that excess water to go from all the watering you'll be doing.
Right, there is a not so little secret hack you can do to really get the best out of your Coleus as well as your other houseplants, and to be honest, it's something I'm not doing enough of.
But there is a good reason that speaks more to my squeamishness than anything else, which I'll reveal in a sec. We all love a summer holiday, don't we?
All that soaking up the deadly sun rays on a sun lounger sipping on pina coladas until the break of dawn. Well, it turns out our houseplants are the same, minus the pina coladas, of course.
Anyway, if you've got a garden or balcony, consider popping your Coleus outside to soak up the extra light and lap up the extra nitrogen from all the rain. By the end of summer, your Coleus really will be a sexy beast. Just make sure to pop her in semi-shade.
Living indoors all her life means that she's not that accustomed to full sun outside.
And here's the bit on why I don't do this more than I would like. Insects. At summer's end, give your plant a thorough cavity search to make sure no contraband enters the house. We don't want an outbreak to fight off all winter. Is your fern a crispy brown mess? Has he barely grown an inch since you brought him into your home?
I hard relate, trust me, because I was in the same boat for over a year and a half with a plant that just refused to look his best, with me pulling out my rather limited hair out in frustration. But since moving into this new home and changing a few things up, he's really put on a growth spurt.
So let me share with you my fern tricks so that you can finally have one to be proud of in your home. Thankfully, it's not too taxing.
So I've had this fern for about a year and a half now, and it's only in the last few months that he's really put on a growth spurt. And I put that down to me getting his living conditions spot on. Let's call him Tony.
Now, Tony started life with me as a little boy in a little pot with lots of healthy green fronds. But the inevitable happened. His lush green fronds soon started to turn crispy brown. And once a frond grows brown, there's no getting it back.
There are a few reasons why this happens, but the most likely is to do with light, but not in the way you might assume.
You see, I wanted the best light for our Tony, so I sat him on a windowsill right up against the window so he could bask in glorious sunlight all day long.
You might think this spells trouble, right? With direct sun causing havoc for the green fronds, turning them brown.
But this wasn't the case. He was actually enjoying life in this spot. That's because it was an east-facing spot, so it was only sunbathing in pretty gentle sunlight in the morning.
Ferns can absolutely handle this, especially in my temperate climate where the sun is a little bit shy to come out and say hello, to say the least. But the problem started to occur when winter rolled in.
Winter is a gloomy time for us Sheffielders, and Tony was only getting 8 hours of sunlight a day. He was unhappy to say the least. A lack of light is one of the primary reasons a frond goes crispy brown. It basically dies.
I mean, just look at this weirdness. Got one side of the plant that is green and relatively lush, and the other side is browner than a bar of Snickers. There's a very good reason why this particular phenomenon has occurred.
When I moved into this home, I plonked Tony down here on the bottom of this bamboo shelving unit, and because he was so far away from the window, I thought I'd better pop a Sansi grow light over his head.
This is when the growth spurt really took off, and why one half is looking great and the other not so much.
Ferns love grow lights. Honestly, it's the safest way to grow one because you have absolute control on how much light they're getting. There's no risk of burning the fronds in direct sunlight, and you avoid them dying from a lack of light.
That is unless you forget to rotate your boy like I did.
Basically, this half was facing the room with the grow light above, and the other side of Tony only had a dark wall for company. This lack of light has been killing this side of Tony since I plonked him down here a few months ago.
This low light problem is clear when you look inside the plant too.
Because Tony is so bushy, light is struggling to get into the middle, so the fronds are going crispy brown. And this is probably happening with yours. Let me know in the comments if it is.
So what does all this mean for your fern then?
Well, I reckon the best spot is not too close to a wall with a Sansi grow light shining overhead and the occasional 90-degree turn so all sides get their fair share of the good stuff.
By the way, there is a link to a very juicy 25% discount off Sansi lights in the description for you to have fun with.
So you could play the risky game and have them up against the window and you could see bountiful fronds in summer, but come winter, a grow light will really help stop the fronds dying off.
Now, light isn't the only reason for a fern's misery. There are a few things that I have changed to really make our Tony sing.
Let's talk humidity. I mean, you probably sat there waiting for me to talk about it, right? After all, ferns are found in damp woodlands, so it makes sense they need high humidity to thrive, surely.
Well, I'm not sure humidity is the be-all and end-all that we all think it is.
So in my old house, humidity was very high. So high, in fact, that black mould on the walls was a constant problem, and the health of the family too. The humidity meter would be constantly sat at 75%, sometimes going up into the 80s. Not great for human health. Anyway, I've moved into this new gaff and humidity is much lower, normally around 50%, and Tony's health seems to have improved if anything.
Admittedly, this is fairly anecdotal, but why worry about something that is nearly impossible to control without 10 humidifiers on the go 24/7?
Instead, I reckon it's 10 times better to just let your boy sit in a consistent environment. The constant swings in humidity as you turn the humidifier on and off every day will be doing no favours to the fronds.
I focus on the other things that have a much bigger impact, like light and watering, and that's the perfect segue then to talk about H2O.
Light and watering are the two biggies when it comes to caring for any plant, and ferns are no different. Now, they're a bit odd in that they don't really show you when they're thirsty for a drink. You have to do the investigative work yourself by sticking your finger in the soil or even using a moisture meter. There's no drooping of the stems like there is with a peace lily, for example. If you let a peace lily dry out a touch, then she's all bent over the floor like a silly lass, isn't she?
Instead, what you'll get with ferns is yet more crispy fronds, and then it's too late, the fronds are toast.
This lack of flop makes it tricky to get the watering right, especially with Tony, as you'll see in a sec. In an ideal world, I like to check Tony twice a week. Fern's like a moist soil as it is, you see. Plus, I think Tony is fairly root bound in his pot, so he tends to dry out much quicker than his friends. A moisture meter is a great option, and I tend to water when the meter reads 3 to avoid the fronds turning on me. This keeps the soil nice and moist at all times.
A quicker way that is a little more advanced and requires you to learn the ins and outs of your plant a little bit is to simply pick him up and feel how heavy he is.
Light as a feather, then his private parts will be drier than, well, you get the idea. Heavy, then hold off for another few days.
This way of doing things is great when you have over 200 plants on the go and you want to get the job done quickly.
Another pro tip is to water your guy like this rather than this. Bottom watering is the secret sauce to healthy plant growth. The soil gets evenly moist, the roots grow down in search of the water, and overall your plant is much healthier.
It's very tricky to get all areas of the soil wet when pouring water over the top of dry soil. It tends to run through or skip off the surface.
If you're one of many of the thousands of plant parents to have downloaded my free plant troubleshooting handbook that is linked in the description, you'll know all about the trouble this next problem can cause.
Ferns have very delicate leaves, don't they? And this normally means one thing. They're sensitive to the build-up of chlorine in our tap water.
Chlorine build-up can be toxic to certain plants, and unfortunately ferns are in that camp.
Don't waste your time leaving cans of water out overnight to dissipate or hauling gallons of distilled water home. The solution is much simpler. Water conditioner, my plant friend.
It treats tap water in a single drop and your sensitive plants are protected.
I brought this to the channel last year and the response has been epic, with tons of plant parents reporting massively improved plants. Give it a whirl.
As well as water conditioner, I am in the habit of adding houseplant focus to my watering can. This isn't really because ferns are particularly heavy feeders, because they're not. It's just part of my routine.
I do recommend that you fertilise all of your plants to keep them nice and healthy.
Fertiliser doesn't make things grow quicker, of course, it just keeps everything ticking over nicely.
Now don't sweat the fertiliser you buy. Any that is suitable for houseplants will be fine. If you only have Miracle-Gro, then have at it.
Organic would be better, but as long as you follow the dosage guidance for indoor plants, you'll be fine.
So the thing you'll notice about our Tony is that his private parts are a little bit puny compared to his upper body. So I've not repotted Tony for a good while, maybe a year, something like that. So I think he needs a bit more room to stretch his legs into. So I've got a bigger pot for him. It's probably maybe 2 or 3 sizes bigger than the one he's in. So I've not looked at the roots, so I thought I'd do that live. Let's pull him out of his pot and have a look. Doesn't look too bad, although there is a thick mat of roots in here that I can feel. When the shape of the root ball conforms to the shape of the pot, then you know it's a little bit root bound. So I'm not going to touch it, I'm just going to put him straight into a bigger pot. I tend not to mess around with roots too much, because I generally think we don't want to upset them too much, and they generally find a way by themselves into the new soil. I'm going to put a base layer of soil, see if he fits in there, like so, and then fill around the edges with new soil. Okay, so I've given Tony a repot, put soil around the edge. It was a bit tricky because he's quite a bushy specimen, so Trying to get my fingers around the pot was tricky, but it's nicely compact in there, so that's good. I've got a nice decorative pot. This should fit in here nicely, like so. And then I'm going to give him a good drink. That's what I do to every time I repot a plant, I always give it a good drink, and I'm going to bottom water. So I'm going to add about 1/3 of the volume of the pot. Let him soak all that up slowly, and then I'll come back the next day and discard any excess.
Now that our Tony has a new place to call home, what do we do with all those crispy fronds that is making him look like he's been brought through a hedge backwards? Prune them out, of course. They won't come back to life, so they gotta go. The tricky thing about ferns is that they often have fronds that are green at the tips but brown near the centre of the plant. It is tricky to make the judgment on if you should cut the whole frond off, isn't it? But if the frond only has green at the very tips, I tend to cut it all out. New fronds will come in no time. This frond, for example, has lots of green, but I'm not really a fan of the browning going on, so off it comes. There, Tony is now ready to continue his growth spurt under this fancy grow light, assuming I can actually remember to rotate him every now and then. I don't mind admitting that aloe vera is the plant I find trickiest to look after.
They often go limp, mushy and discoloured like they're on a one-way ticket to the compost heap, don't they? If you make a couple of mistakes with light and water, they go downhill quick.
But it doesn't have to be that way. There are a few tricks that I have learned to keep those juicy leaves nice and plump and not bending over onto the floor that I'll share in this video so that we can all have thriving aloes in our home to harvest whenever we like. So, I've got 2 aloes in my home, and as you can see, one is doing pretty well with upright leaves that you just love to see, and one that is clearly on the struggle bus. We'll call the good one Bob and the grumpy one Steve to make things easy.
Now, if you're a subscriber to the channel, then you'll know that I moved into this new gaff here about 6 months ago. There's been a lot of toing and froing with my plants as I try to find the best spots for them all.
The majority of them live here in my southwest facing conservatory so that they get to bask in the elusive Sheffield sun.
I'll admit that finding the best spot for my aloes hasn't really been top of my priorities.
You know, they're competing against Monsteras, Philodendron, Coleus and the like, so the best spots are reserved for those bad boys. So I ended up popping them here. Not too bad a spot I thought, because it's right up against the window, but they are protected from the direct sun rays.
But over winter, I noticed that things were starting to go south for both Bob and Steve. They were losing their vibrant colour and the leaves were starting to flop.
So I decided to experiment by popping Bob here, and wow, what a difference it's made. Steve is still a floppy so-and-so, but Bob has perked right up. Those leaves are as erect as anything you'd want to see. Clearly the change in scenery has done Bob the world of good. So what's the difference? Well, this spot is much sunnier. Even though I moved Bob out of the sunny conservatory, the position he is in is much better. He now gets a good 7 or so hours of direct sun on his back, and he loves it. There is nothing blocking his ability to develop a tan. Steve's spot isn't so great on reflection. Sure, he is sat right up against the window, but the way the sun comes around and into the room means he only gets 2 hours tops of sun on his back. By the time the sun is in prime position and lighting up the room, there's all sorts casting shade onto poor old Steve, and it's showing in his leaves. The colour just isn't there.
When folks complain about their aloe dying within only a few months, there's only normally 2 causes. The biggest one is a lack of light, and we'll come back to the second in a jiffy.
I know you've probably read or heard that indoor plants should only be placed in indirect light, but for aloes this just isn't the case. Give them as much sun as you can, my plant friend. They're a type of succulent and so crave that vitamin D.
In fact, aloes are native to the arid regions of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, and so spend their days lapping up the sun, so we should mimic this as much as possible at home.
Now, there is a slight caveat to all of this. If you pop your guy right up against the sunniest window and you do start to see some burn marks on the leaves, then it could be that the glass is amplifying the sun a bit too much, so it'll be a good idea just to set him back from the window a bit.
This is more likely to happen if you've had your guy in a lower light spot and then move him right up against a really bright window. The sudden change might just be too much for him.
you'll notice some browning on the tips and edges and maybe some brown spots on the skin.
So what do we do when we just don't have a sunny enough window? Maybe we live in a house or flat that only has north-facing windows.
Well, this is a bit tricky because they need those sun rays to truly thrive, but as long as you're super careful with your watering, it should still survive just fine. I would perhaps recommend a scented grow light if you want yours to grow relatively quickly so that you can harvest on a semi-regular basis.
They're pretty affordable, use LEDs and will do a great job of providing the light your aloe needs. So I just mentioned watering, and this is the other big killer to aloes that I alluded to earlier, because unfortunately people get watering these bad boys so wrong.
People either drown them or neglect them, leading to soggy or shriveled leaves. But once you understand how these plants work, it all becomes so much easier. I had an aha moment when I took a closer look inside an aloe leaf, so let's do the same. That gel inside is famous for soothing burns, cuts and skin irritation, so at some point you'll probably want to harvest it, won't you? There are two ways you can do this, but one is definitely better. You can either trim off a small section or remove the entire leaf at the base. The best method depends on how often you use it. If you're reaching for aloe all the time because you're always burning yourself, then just snip what you need. But if you only need it once in a while, taking off a whole leaf keeps things looking tidy. That's because cutting part of a leaf leaves an ugly stump that won't heal or grow back. If you do that repeatedly, your plant starts to look rough. But if you use aloe regularly and always take full leaves, you'll run out fast. Instead, trim what you need, let it seal itself off, and then repeat when necessary. Now, check this out. When I squeeze this leaf, look at all that gel oozing out. Picture what happens when we overwater an aloe. That gel inside just soaks up too much water, causing the leaves to swell and turn into a mushy disaster. And what if we don't water enough? The gel dries out and the leaves shrivel up like old leather. So what's the right way to water an aloe? Here's what I do. When I water my aloe, I go all in. I make sure every inch of soil is completely saturated.
You can either bottom water by letting the pot sit in a cache pot filled with water until the soil wicks it all up, or you can water from the top multiple times to ensure full absorption.
At this stage, you cannot overdo it.
And here's the biggest lesson in houseplant watering. It's not about how much water you give at once, it's about how often.
Drench it thoroughly, but then leave it alone until the soil is bone dry. For me, that means watering every 3 or 4 weeks in the summer and hardly ever in winter. But don't just follow what I do or even a schedule, my plant friend.
It's always best to check the soil first. This is something I constantly preach in my videos, and I'll take it to my grave.
Stick your finger in, give it a swirl, pull it out and see how dirty or not your finger is. Or just use a moisture meter, much simpler.
Never on a schedule, no matter what the plant app says. A strict watering routine can do more harm than good.
So with all this waiting for your soil to dry out on repeat, you'll probably notice one thing, that the soil has become pretty hydrophobic. Hydrophobic? What the bejesus does that mean?
Well, have you ever put a microfiber cloth under the tap to try and get it wet? For the first 20 seconds or so, it just doesn't really want to, does it? Almost like it's repelling water. You really have to scrunch it up to get it to accept it.
This is similar to soil. It goes bone dry, and then when we pour water over the top, it tends to skid off the surface or trickle through without actually wetting the soil. And this is why I like to bottom water. You simply add water about a third of the way up the pot, sit the plant in, and forget about him for a couple of hours. When you come back, he'll have taken what he needs and you just simply chuck out the excess.
It's great because the water slowly wicks up through the soil, avoiding that runoff we see with top watering.
And by the way, I wouldn't worry too much about fertiliser. They'll like a little nibble here and there, but they're not really massive feeders.
I tend to feed mine a diluted amount of houseplant focus once a month during spring and summer, and then not bother at all in autumn and winter. Now, let's talk soil and repotting, because if we get this bit wrong, then we'll be writing an obituary for our aloe friend before long.
The truth is, you shouldn't have to repot your aloe that often, maybe every couple of years. They don't have the biggest root system and they tend to prefer it slightly snug in the pot.
It goes back to the leaves, you see. They just don't want so much wet soil around their roots, drawing up moisture into the leaves all the time.
They'd much rather everything dries out super quick, which is why the soil you use when you do come to repot is vital.
Never use soil from the garden or even compost. This is much too heavy and will hold on to moisture for too long. I used to do this for my houseplants and it was a mess. Plus, there were fungus gnats everywhere.
You're much better off going with coconut coir with lots of perlite or sand added. This will help excess water drain through and stop it staying sopping wet for ages.
Coconut coir is essentially a soilless medium. It does retain some moisture like soil, but doesn't easily become heavy and saturated.
I like to use Cybertanica's succulent mix so that I'm not having to mess around making my own soil mix, and it's got everything your aloe needs. So you probably noticed that both Bob and Steve have a layer of stones on the soil, and there are a couple of reasons for this. First, I think it smartens them both up nicely. Instead of looking at crusty old soil, I get to look at decorative stones. But there is a functional reason too.
When I got these guys, they were both extremely top heavy. In fact, they were flopping about all over the place, and this is unfortunately very common. It goes back to what I was saying about their immature root system.
They're often not anchored into the pot properly due to how shallow rooted they are, which is when you get this swaying. Now the worst thing you can do for an aloe is pop him into a giant pot.
The bigger the pot, the more soil there is and the longer it takes to dry out, which is not great for the leaves.
So when I repotted Bob and Steve, I needed something to keep them weighed down, so I plonked a bunch of stones on top.
And it helped a decent amount when they both matured into their pots, which they're both still hardly done, truth be told.
A pot that I highly recommend for these guys, that I hardly ever recommend for indoor plants, is this. Terracotta is nice and heavy and plenty porous enough for moisture to escape. Do you have a spider plant that is looking a little, shall we say, dishevelled? A few crispy leaves, a bit of yellowing, droopiness, maybe the vibrant colour is fading. If you are struggling with this, then you are not alone, my plant friend.
I've long battled to keep this popular plant happy with mixed results, but last year I made a significant change to this guy, and now he's absolutely thriving, and I'm going to spill the beans in this video.
Leaf problems like yellowing or brown crispy edges is universal. I think everyone suffers with this at some point of owning this fussy plant. But why does it happen?
Well, it's all to do with the roots and how skilled we are at keeping them happy. If the roots are unhappy, then it shows through the leaves.
This is a particular problem for this plant, more so than any other, apart from maybe Calatheas. They're thin and delicate, and the slightest mistake we make with the plant's private parts means they spiral into a cycle of crispy doom. It's all to do with watering.
The spider plant hates nothing more than for the soil to dry out and then get soaked, and then dry out and then get soaked again, and for this cycle to rinse and repeat.
They're much more sensitive than a Monstera, for example, who wouldn't bat an eyelid at this.
This is particularly a problem if we veer too far into the forgetting to water our plant and letting the soil go bone dry territory.
What happens is that the roots get starved of water and so can't funnel any to the leaves, and the tiny leaf cells burst and we are left with that ugly scarring in the form of brown crispy edges.
So, armed with this knowledge, it seems like the answer is fairly obvious, right? Never let the soil dry out. And this should work, in theory.
The problem we have though is the risk of overwatering and all the carnage that brings. Getting the balance right between keeping the soil constantly moist and not waterlogged is a challenge even the most experienced gardeners struggle with.
The thing we have to balance is not water necessarily, but instead oxygen. Starve the root ball of oxygen and root rot misery will be upon us.
It's easy to suck out all the oxygen from the soil by keeping it wet. This is why the plant pros always bang on about checking the soil first before watering. So I've long struggled with this. It's a fine balancing act between a healthy root system and one that's at death's door.
But then last year I changed something that takes this balancing act completely away, and the result has been this beautiful plant.
This is actually the offspring of this mother plant, and the secret was that I popped a baby plantlet into a pot of stones instead of soil. And by stones, I mean pond, which is a fancy name for a collection of stones. Anyway, this pot then spends the rest of its day sat in a pool of water in a ceramic pot. This is a semi-hydro setup, and it's been a game changer for said spider plant. So why does this work so well?
Well, there are a few things that we need to get right for this to work properly, but the nitty-gritty of it is that there is always water available for the roots.
The idea is that you never let the pool of water run dry. As soon as it looks like it's running low, you top it up to about a third of the way up the pot.
The constant access to water means that the roots and leaves aren't on a roller coaster ride of getting drenched and then drying out and the cycle repeating. Everything stays nice and constant.
Just look how perky this fella is compared to his mother. He's got a youthful exuberance, doesn't he? This is all because he's got a main line of water fed directly to his roots and leaves all the time. Now, I know what you're thinking. Won't the fact that he's sat in water all day and all night lead to root rot? It goes against every plant care principle, surely.
This is exactly what I thought when I was umming and ahhing about semi-hydro a couple of years ago. But when I remembered what the root cause of root rot was, it all clicked for me.
Roots die from a lack of oxygen. It's not the water. Water has plenty of oxygen available, and so the roots just won't suffocate.
It's when the tiny particles of soil get saturated that we're in trouble. Oxygen and saturated soil go together like green eggs and chalk.
I mean, just look at all these healthy roots filling out the pot. There's not a black root to be seen. It's glorious. Plants can and will live in water. The stones in the pot are only really there to keep the plant suspended in the pot and help bridge the gap between dry roots and water.
Now, there are a few things that we need to get right for all of this to work. It's not just simply a case of filling a pot with some stones and water and being done with it.
Because you're the doting plant parent, I'm sure you're giving all your plants their 3 meals a day in the form of some fertiliser. Maybe you've got some Miracle Grow that you add every month, or maybe you've gone organic with something like Houseplant Focus like me. Whatever fertiliser you use, it is great that you're in the habit of feeding your little guys.
Now that I've shown you the wonders of semi-hydro for spider plants, you're probably thinking that you'll just carry on fertilising them in the same way.
Sadly, this would be a mistake. A mistake that will leave your little guy malnourished and not able to grow and look spectacular like he's destined to.
Bear with me on this because I'm no soil scientist, but here's what I've learned.
Regular houseplant fertiliser does not contain the full range of nutrients. Some are missing because it is assumed that the natural processes in the soil, like the microbes going about their business, will supply them.
The stumbling block here is that semi-hydro is obviously soilless, so there aren't the microbes available to supply the missing nutrients.
So if we add regular fertiliser to the pool of water in the pot, the plant won't be getting his 5 a day. This can lead to stunted growth and less oomph in the leaves.
Now, luckily for us, there are fertilisers out there that will provide everything the plant needs. Hydroponic fertilisers.
I know it does sound like a pain to get a dedicated fertiliser just for one plant, but trust me, it does make a big difference.
Plus, once you start to see the benefits on plants like this, you'll probably want to go further with more plants.
So look out for hydroponic fertiliser like this. It should say full spectrum on the bottle.
Now, there is something else you need to be aware of before you go gung-ho with semi-hydro.
There is a world in which no matter how much fertiliser you give, the plant just will not be able to suck it up. It's all to do with pH.
Now, the importance of pH is something that's relatively new to me. I had no idea just how crucial it was until fairly recently. And honestly, I wish I'd known sooner because it caught me off guard and it might catch you off guard too.
I won't go too far into the science, but here's the bit that matters.
Imagine your plant's soil is like a fridge. Bear with me on this. All the nutrients your plant needs are tucked away inside. Calcium, magnesium, iron, you name it.
But here's the catch. If the pH isn't right, it's like the fridge is locked.
Your plant knows that the nutrients are in there, but it just can't get to them. Too acidic and the door's jammed shut. If it's too alkaline, then the key doesn't fit. Just right, the fridge opens and your plant can feast.
So even if you're giving your plant the perfect fertiliser, it won't matter if the pH is wrong. You just can't access the nutrients in the fridge. That's why this sneaky little number is so important. I know it's another thing to check, but it's worth putting your mind at rest and getting a little bottle of test strips to see how your tap water is coming out.
Here in the UK, our water tends to be neutral, if not slightly acidic, but from what I understand, it tends to be more alkaline in the US and Canada.
Once you know where you stand, you'll either need to adjust it up or down so that it's in the neutral range, or if you're lucky like me, do nothing. There are pH down and up products you can buy to make your water just right for your plant. And this doesn't just apply to semi-hydro either, even soil plants will benefit. So popping this guy in semi-hydro isn't the only thing I put this improved look down to.
There is something else that I'm adding to the water along with the fertiliser that I'm sure you're familiar with if you're a long-time subscriber to the channel.
Water conditioner. I brought this to my viewers nearly 2 years ago, and it's been great to see all the comments flood in about how this stuff has transformed their plants whenever I mention it in any of my videos. If you're not in the know, then water conditioner will neutralise chlorine in tap water.
It's usually used in fish tanks to help keep water safe for fish, but it's just as beneficial for plants.
Chlorine in tap water isn't a big deal for most plants, but for spider plants and Calathea for example it is.
The slow, constant build-up of chlorine in the soil, or in this case the water, from when we water every week can cause problems for the roots and lead to brown crispy edges on the leaves.
And when I made the change, I saw a remarkable improvement in lots of my fussy plants. So just because this guy is semi-hydro, I'm not skimping on the water conditioner. It's just a case of adding a single drop to a 1 litre watering can. Seriously, that's it. A bottle lasts forever. So how should you go about making the switch to semi-hydro? Well, the easiest way that involves no fuss, and is the way that I did it with this guy, is to simply take one of those babies that is hanging from the plant and pop it into a pot of pon or leca. This way, there's no changeover needed and no adjustment period for the plant.
If yours doesn't have any babies yet, then it's just a case of removing as much of the soil as you can, washing the roots and then popping the plant in his new home.
I would trim back any extra long roots because they might struggle with the transition. It's best to keep everything nice and trim. There might be a learning curve for the plant as he gets used to things. This might mean a few lost leaves, but give him some time and he will bounce back stronger. Orchids can be tricky plants to grow at home, can't they? They look gorgeous in the shop with their majestic blooms bewitching you, so you bring a couple home to proudly display in your home, but then a couple of weeks later the flowers fall off and they never come back, leaving you with just a pot of leaves and alien-like roots. In the bin they go, right?
If this sounds familiar, then I completely get it, because this was me not long ago. So much so that I stopped buying them, thinking they were a waste of time.
Well, I was missing out, and so are you too, because once you understand their growth habit, as well as their wants and don't wants, they will reward you with stunning flowers for months every single year for many years to come.
I've now got a whole bunch of them in my collection. I do feel like I've got a pretty good idea on what I'm doing with them, so let me spill the beans. So to get this much misunderstood plant firing on all cylinders in our homes, we first need to understand their growth habit.
Once we know this, everything clicks into place, trust me. We start to understand what light they need and why, what kind of watering is best, when we should repot them, and also the best way to prune them, all of which is coming up in this video. So these happy chappies are always displayed in the shop in their blooming phase.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You wouldn't be in any way inclined to buy this, would you? And the trouble is, most people seem to buy these in the same way as they buy a bunch of cut flowers, to chuck them in the bin as soon as the flowers fade away, and this is a massive waste.
The light these guys need during this blooming phase is massively important to prolong their life, as I'll explain in a bit. Now, once the plant has done flowering, it goes into the growth phase. This phase is all about rest and recuperation and getting ready for the next blooming cycle.
This stage is massively important, and if we get it wrong here, we won't get a strong flowering cycle, if one at all.
So leaf growth and root development will be the main focus, so we need to help him do just that. This phase is the longest phase and normally lasts 5 months or so.
Once he feels like he's recharged his batteries enough, he'll start the flower spike development phase, and this normally lasts a couple of months. After that, bud formation on the flower spike will start, and it'll take him about a month to show off his blooms.
We're then back in the flowering phase, and this should last a good 4 months all being well, and there are some nifty tricks we can do to prolong this as much as possible, and it involves getting your snippers out. Pruning your orchid when in the flowering phase. A much misunderstood practice, but hopefully now that we know all about the life cycle, it will all make sense. It did for me anyway.
A few weeks after you brought your orchid home, the flowers will start to fade and eventually fall off. And this is par for the course, so there's no need to panic.
Sometimes this happens quite quickly, and sometimes the flowers seem to last forever. The truth is, this actually depends on if you bought an orchid that has all its blooms already on show, or whether there are some unopened blooms still on the spike that will open later in your home. And the trick is to buy the latter.
Once you're left with something like this, you have 3 options.
Providing the spike is green and healthy, we can leave it intact and hope that the spike will produce more flowers from low down.
I found this to be fairly unlikely, and despite all the hoping and praying, they do seem to need human intervention to produce more flowers. Plus, leaving the spike intact like this means it will take longer for him to recover for his next blooming stage next year.
Option 2 is to cut the spike above the highest unopened node. This encourages branching and a fresh set of flowers will follow. I have found that this doesn't always work though, particularly if you've not got the watering and light correct. More on that in a bit.
Now this is the option I take, but I only prune once, and here's why.
Repeatedly pruning and waiting for the plant to send out yet more flowers delays the rest period, and I found that subsequent growth and the next flowering cycle to be weaker.
The more you cut, the less impressive the next batch of flowers tends to be, and this tends to eat into the rest period the plant needs to send out an impressive brand new set of flowers next year.
This leads me to option 3, to cut the spike off completely.
Firstly, if the spike is brown and has dried out, then absolutely cut it off as close to the base as possible. It's donezo.
If the spike is still green and healthy, then cutting it off completely rather than just at the node could be the way to go.
The plant can fully rest and recover, and future bloom should be much more robust.
Like I say though, I like to prune once to get more juice from the plant, and then after that, I cut the spikes down.
Now, the light you give your little guy during this flowering phase is massively important.
To unpack that though, we first need to talk about light for the all-important growth phase. You know, the phase without any flowers where the plant just wants to grow leaves and roots.
Here, the plant just wants to lap up as much light as possible. Photosynthesis is king, and Mr. Orchid just wants to sit on his throne and bask in the good stuff all day. And if you get it right, you should start to see the little fella grow new leaves from the middle.
Getting it right involves placing him near a bright window. In my climate, here in gloomy Sheffield, I sit them right up against my south-facing window, and they love it.
If you're in a hotter climate than me, then you might need to set him back further to avoid scorching on the leaves, but do have a play and see what's best.
If you've only got a north-facing window and you're in the northern hemisphere, then this probably won't cut it. A Santi grow light will be your best friend then. Stick it on for at least 12 hours a day.
So the plant will hopefully soak up lots of sun, recharge his batteries, produce lots of new leaves, and then, when he's ready, he'll send out a flower spike or two.
Now, up until the first flowers show themselves, you want the light to be the same, nice and consistent. Any moving around and this will only upset him, and he might punish you with weaker blooms. But once they're out and on full show, we need to reduce the light. This is the trick. Sounds weird, I know, but the aim of the game here is to prolong blooms, and as anyone in the flowering business knows, to prolong blooms, we should give less light.
Bright light encourages a faster metabolism for Mr. Orchid, and the flowers will fade quicker. So set him further back from the window, or if he's under a grow light, move him further away or reduce the number of hours the light is on.
But don't stick him in a dark cupboard or anything daft, just a little less light.
So that's the light sorted. Equally important is watering, especially during the growth phase.
Watering orchids really did flummox me for the longest time because it's completely different to how we water our houseplants, and that's mainly because of the soil mix that they get to call home.
And when I say soil, I don't mean soil at all. They're normally living in bark or moss. No soil to be seen.
This is of course because they're epiphytes, plants that generally grow in the bark of trees rather than in soil in the ground.
So bark doesn't hold on to moisture nearly as long as soil, which means we're in danger of killing the roots from dehydration if we're not careful.
Now when the orchid is in the growth phase, he'll be thirsty for water. His metabolism will be in overdrive from all the light you're giving him and all those leaves he's producing.
This means we need to give him a good drink when his roots and bark start to dry out, but judging this can be tricky though, and it's where clear plastic pots come in super handy.
If there is lots of condensation in the pot, then leave it another couple of days and check again. The pot should be dry. You can stick your finger in and have a bit of a rummage too. If it feels dry in there, then give him a drink.
But don't stress too much about if it's dry or not. You won't kill him by giving him a good drink a couple of days before he's absolutely ready. Death only really happens if he's soaking wet for weeks or months at a time, or if he's been told to live in soil.
Another pro tip to see how hydrated an orchid is to check the roots. Green roots are well hydrated, brown, black and mushy roots are overwatered, and silvery roots are when it's time to water. That's the general guide.
If the roots of your orchid are consistently green and silvery and nice and plump, then you're watering like a Proma plant friend.
So what's the best way to water these devilishly tricky plants? Well, option 1 is to take your orchid over to the sink and pour a bunch of water all over the bark and roots. During the growth phase, I would normally do this once a week, but it does depend on your climate. It's always best to check first.
Now there are lots of warnings out there that say to avoid wetting the leaves and especially the crown of the plant at all costs, and honestly this is a little overblown in my book.
Sure, it's best to avoid this if you can, but if you do get a splash of water on the leaves, then no biggie, just dry them off with some kitchen roll. Simples. Any moisture left over will soon dry off when sat next to your bright window. The main sign that this is becoming an issue for you is multiple yellowing leaves. The odd yellowing leaf that is clearly the oldest is not normally an issue though, and rather just a sign of aging.
So this watering over the sink malarkey was the method I used for a long time, until I realised that I wasn't hydrating the roots or the bark as much as he'd like. And you can normally tell this when the leaves aren't as plump as they should be.
So I've since switched it up to the soak and drain method, and my orchids are much better for it. I pour a bunch of water into the cash pot and let the orchid bathe in it for a good half an hour or so.
Making sure your orchid is properly hydrated during the growth phase is so important, and letting the poor fella dry out for too long in between will lead to weaker blooms or worse, no blooms at all.
When your little guy is in full flowering mode, he will be a little more forgiving, but I still make sure to keep him hydrated. Forget about him for a month and those blooms will soon drop off.
After a year of growing leaves and roots and then flowering, you might start to notice that your little guy is not so little anymore. He's grown quite a healthy pack down there, and he might need upgrading from a 2-bed terrace to a 3-bed semi.
It's best to have a look at this after he's done flowering and after you've cut off his spikes. A good sign he has outgrown his home is that the pot is majority root and he's pushing himself out of the pot. Get a clear plastic pot that is a couple of sizes bigger and it'll be a much happier specimen for the upcoming growth phase.
I do advise going clear plastic pots because orchid roots are capable of photosynthesizing, so it's a good thing to let them bask in some light. And this is when you start to see green tips on the end of the roots like this.
And repotting is a great opportunity to give the roots a bit of a service, and this means pruning, my plant friend. Yeah, orchid roots can be pruned, and if things are black and mushy, it's definitely the way to go. We don't want dead roots rotting and creating a mess in the pot after all. The name of the game with orchid roots is airflow. This means two things. Never use soil and don't pack everything in too tightly. I personally always use bark because I find moss to be a pain in the bum when it comes to repotting. This is my Oxalis Triangularis, otherwise known as the purple shamrock plant, and I don't mind boasting about how beautiful he is looking.
It's not always been that way though. I've had him over 3 years and it's only now that I've got the conditions right for him to finally flourish. If you have one yourself, then I'm sure you're familiar with how tricky these plants are to get right.
Leggy stems, floppy leaves, baldness, leaves going crispy, no flowers. It can be a right challenge, but I finally figured it out and I'm sharing it all in this video.
Now, there are 3 main challenges when it comes to this plant.
Challenge 1 is the toughest and it's all about stopping those long dangly stems getting too leggy. When they get too leggy, they start to droop and you end up with a plant that looks like he's been sat on.
Challenge 2 is to keep these leaves looking as fresh as a daisy. They are often quite short-lived if we get things wrong and we end up with a crispy brown mess.
Challenge 3 is linked to that, but more seasonal. How on earth do we stop them looking so terrible in winter?
This plant suffers the most serious case of seasonal affective disorder, and by mid-winter he often looks like he's been dragged through a hedge backwards, twice. The solution to this is my greatest trick that I can't wait to share with you. Before we go about conquering these 3 challenges, I think we should have a look at how he wants to grow and what we should expect from a healthy ox.
The key thing to know is that they don't grow from stems that shoot up from roots in the soil. Instead, the leaves shoot up from little brown bulbs. This fella is living in a clear plastic pot, and I did that so that we can see exactly what is happening below the surface. And right there, you can see an example of how the leaves shoot up from a bulb. Looks pretty neat, eh?
Now the happier ox is, the more bulbs he will grow in the soil, and the more leaves will shoot up to say hello. This is when we end up with a nice bushy plant.
So keeping these temperamental little things happy is key to our success.
Another sign that we are getting things right is the endless little blue purpley flowers that shoot up alongside the leaves.
They're not majorly something to write home about, mainly because they're so short-lived, but get it right and we should see them all summer long. And finally, something that surprises a lot of folks is how they put themselves to bed at night. When the sun starts to go down, Ox puts his jammies on, brushes his teeth, shuts all his leaves and goes to bed. It's quite an amusing little trick that still catches me off guard on an evening.
Now that we know the ins and outs of Ox, let's have a think about conquering Challenge 1, stopping the leaves becoming so leggy.
I struggled with this year after year until I moved into this new house, and I'm now finally seeing the results I want to see. It's all to do with one thing: light.
Now I know you hear it all the time in these plant care videos, give your plant bright indirect light, blah blah blah. I get bored saying it, to be honest, but with Ox there is a lot more to it.
Now in my old place, I knew I didn't have the best light for him. That's why I sat him right underneath a Sansi grow light, which would be perfect for 99.99% of plants, but not for Ox.
The problem is that grow lights are a bit of a spotlight. They stay fixed and your plant is meant to just sit there lapping up the vitamin D. And most are fine with this, but this spotlight that doesn't move really doesn't work for Ox.
Fast forward to present day and I've got him right here, slap bang in the middle of my conservatory on my dining table. This spot is ideal because on a rare sunny day here in Sheffield, the sun comes through on that side at about 11 AM and then follows its way around to the other side there until it disappears at about 8 PM. This is in high summer, by the way.
You might think that's great, over 8 hours of sun is perfect, and yeah, that is perfect, but it's not just about the quantity, it's about the quality.
For these leaves to be happy, they all need to be getting their fair share of the sun. If only half the plant is getting good light, then it'll end up pushing all its leaves in that direction and you'll have an awkward looking plant. Something that happens under a fixed grow light. So having the sun come in and shine on his left side and then go around to his right side is perfect. It's a near enough even balance that he's loving. And I know what you're thinking, what about his rear end, the part that isn't facing the windows? Isn't that going to suffer? Yes, and this is where the next crucial thing that you absolutely must do comes in. It's a massive pain in the bum, but for the best plant it's necessary. Come over every morning and rotate your little guy. It's honestly the secret to my success, and I do mean daily, by the way. Unfortunately, if we leave it a week, you'll see your plant become a tangled mess as the leaves at the back grow longer stems to peer over and try and search for the light, and then when we rotate and leave it another week, the next batch of leaves grow leggy. Before long you've got a mess of tangled spaghetti. You might think I'm exaggerating, but these leaves really do react very fast to the light. So, without fail, I come across every morning and rotate 100 degrees.
But what if I don't have the luxury of a sun-baked conservatory, I hear you cry? And the truth is that if you can't offer your Ox the light he really craves, then honestly you're going to kind of struggle to keep him in tip-top shape.
Find the brightest spot in your home and get into the habit of rotating him as much as you can. And that means ideally finding a spot where sunlight will bask on the leaves because they really do love the sun. So, challenge 2. Stopping those beautiful purple leaves becoming a crispy mess. It used to happen to mine all the time. One by one they go by the wayside until you end up with baldy in your living room.
There are two main reasons this happens, and we've already covered the first one. Light. Getting the light right, as we've discussed, will go a long way to keeping the leaves nice and lush.
But reason 2 is all to do with the bulbs. If the bulbs aren't happy, then we have no chance of the leaves looking perfect. This means our watering needs to be on point.
I will admit that getting the watering right for Ox is a bit of a tricky conundrum, but with the right knowledge and tools you'll be a pro.
Now I reckon Ox should have been christened Goldilocks because a fussy so-and-so he most certainly is. He wants his soil to be just right, not too wet and not too dry. If it's either of those, then the bulbs start to suffer. Too wet and those delicate little bulbs turn to mush and all the shoots coming from it will perish alongside it. Too dry and those delicate petioles that link the leaf petals to the bulb start to wilt, and once an Ox starts to wilt we're in trouble.
Most plants like peace lily or Calathea tend to bounce back pretty handily from being thirsty, don't they? But this isn't really the case with Ox. He seems to carry the scars forever.
So how do we go about watering then? First, your guy should be living in a decent sized pot. Those bulbs need a decent amount of room to spread and not fight with each other for water. This is why I've got mine in a pretty big clear plastic pot. I had a bunch of bulbs and I know how much they spread throughout the year. This is the first time I've actually done this and the results have been great. I used to keep him all crammed in a little pot and looking back he was set up to fail, the poor fella.
Now Oxalis don't like the soil to dry out fully like a Monstera or a Pothos would. The aim of the game is keeping the soil evenly moist but not too wet.
At this point in a video like this, I would normally bang on about how using a moisture meter is the best thing since sliced bread, but in this case I'm not sure I can. This is because of the bulbs in the soil. Because there are so many, it's going to be tricky to avoid stabbing them with your moisture meter and potentially killing a batch of leaves.
I'm sure they're more robust than that, but I've gone for the pick-up method.
It takes a little bit of getting to know your plant, but pick him up and feel how heavy he is, compared to when he was fully watered. If he's starting to feel quite light, especially at the bottom of the pot, then top him up.
You can prod around the surface of the soil with your finger, but this isn't the area we should be most concerned about. We need to know how things are going deeper in the pot.
But I'd err on the side of keeping things moist rather than dry and not worrying too much about overwatering. As long as he's not sat in saturated soil for months, he should be okay.
I'm sure you're after some sort of timeline, and I will give you one, but just know that this is based on my temperate climate, which may be very different to yours.
I'm watering mine roughly every 5 to 7 days. 5 days during hot and sunny weather, and 7 days when it's gone rainy again. And you'll notice that I'm bottom watering. For me, this is the key to keeping all the soil evenly moist and all those bulbs happy. Top watering tends to be a bit patchy. I aim to go about a third of the way up the pot so I know all the bulbs will get a decent drink.
The absolute best thing you can do for your ox is to forget about him for 4 months of the year. Seriously, every year I stick him in a dark cupboard and don't even look at him, let alone give him a drink for 4 months at least. But why am I doing this?
It's all to do with challenge 3, stopping that tired look during winter that is oh so common with this plant. But won't doing this kill him off? No. And all will become clear in a sec, trust me.
So your ox is looking miserable in winter because of the much lower light and colder temps. It's obvious really, isn't it? A plant that craves the sun as much as this is going to miss it when it disappears for 4 months.
And outside, ox has it sussed. He dies back above ground and goes into hibernation mode before popping up again when the light improves and it's a bit warmer. Now indoors, this won't happen by itself. The warm temps of your home kind of trick him into a false sense of security and he keeps going through the winter, even though it's really not doing him any good. So we need to force him into dormancy.
Most guides on the internet recommend doing this every 3 or so years, but I think it's best doing it every single year. The bulbs get a chance to recharge over winter and we'll get a much stronger plant in spring and summer.
Plus, this allows us to correct any mistakes we might have made during the summer. It's like we're getting pardoned for our sins.
So how do we go about forcing dormancy? Well, it's dead easy. Like I said, just stick him in a dark cupboard and ignore him. It really is that simple.
Definitely don't give him any water. He will look an absolute mess by spring, but it really doesn't matter. Bulb health is what matters most. When spring does roll in, discard the dead leaves, empty the contents of the pot and go hunting for bulbs. Pot them up into fresh soil in a decent sized pot, water thoroughly, pop him in the sun, and then in about 3 weeks new shoots should start popping up. So I guess we've not really solved problem 3, but at least we don't have to see him being miserable.